Yeah.
It was very consuming.
Yeah.
I've described the really booming years.
Yeah.
It was like being a surfer.
Yeah.
You'd catch the wave, you'd ride it in, hit the shore, you pick up your board, and you paddle back out and do it again. It's like we never took a break to really absorb what was happening around us.
Yeah.
It was so relentless. The waves just kept coming.
And you don't want to miss one.
Yeah, you don't want to miss one.
Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining us. This is our second episode as we look at the history of Trinity Baptist Church as we approach our 75th anniversary this coming summer. We're going to spend some months here telling stories of Trinity's history. Where has God moved in and through and around Trinity Baptist Church in our history? And how is some of that God movement, that spirit movement of our past, continuing to animate our present and guide our future? I'm excited today to be joined by my friend, the Irreverend Johnny White. You've got the greatest voicemail I know, introducing yourself as the Irreverend Johnny White.
Yeah.
Johnny, I'll just let you tell about yourself. Tell us, how did you come to Trinity? Tell us some of your roles at Trinity through the years, for those who may be newer and not remember you.
I had this fantastic connection to Trinity Baptist Church. My younger sister was in the single adult group here back in the 70s.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was approaching graduation from seminary, had nowhere to go and no real prospects. And she communicated to the Freedom Singers. She was a singer in the Freedom Singers, and she communicated to Tommy Lyons, the director, hey, my big brother is about to graduate from seminary. And he said, well, we're looking for someone. And she would call me and say, they're looking for a resume. And I would say, big church, San Antonio, they're not looking for a resume for me. And finally, Tommy Lyons got on the phone one evening and said, seriously, we're looking for your resume.
Yeah.
I went, okay, I take it serious. I sent a resume, heard from Dan McClendon.
Yeah.
And Dan says, we're looking for someone to work with young adults. Would you be interested? Well, here's where I was in my life. In my life, I had done youth ministry.
Yeah.
And I was fed up with youth ministry.
That'll happen.
But I did not feel called to preach.
Yeah.
And I thought ministers of education were pencil pushers. And so I thought, I don't fit. I don't know. Why did I do this seminary thing?
Yeah.
I don't know a role in which I fit.
Yeah.
And he says, we're looking for someone to be minister with young adults. And I went, that sounds interesting. Well, Dan had a layover in DFW.
Yeah.
And he says, I've got about a 1 hour layover. Could you meet me in DFW? And I met Dan at DFW. And I remember asking, well, how will I know who you are? He says, I have your picture. I'll find you. And sure enough, Dan and I sat there in DFW in a lobby kind of area.
Yeah.
And we talked, and he missed his next flight.
Wow. Huh.
But the funny part is at the end of that conversation, we shook hands, and he said, I remember distinctly, he said, you are a fine young man, but we need someone with more experience. And I said, I understand. It was nice talking with you. And he said, but if you ever come to San Antonio, he handed me his card. He says, if you ever come to San Antonio to visit your sister, please call me. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
I took him at his word.
Yeah.
I came down to San Antonio, to the old San Antonio Baptist Association, to a Sunday school conference. And I had his card in my billfold, and I went to the phone at the desk at the association, and I called his number and said, hey, you told me if I was ever in town. He said, where are you? I told him where I was. He says, I'll be there in 5 minutes, be on the curb. And so I walked out and stood on the curb. I never returned to the Sunday school conference. he drove me. The old San Antonio Baptist Association was right down here on the frontage road. It's part
Okay.
of Trinity University now.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
So we were literally
Right here.
a quarter of a mile from the church. He drove me up to the church offices, walked me down the hall directly into Buckner's office, and I'll never forget. Buckner was wearing a pastel yellow jogging suit with matching yellow tennis shoes, jogging shoes.
Yeah.
And he's he had coffee table. He's got his feet up on the coffee table, and I'm still going, what the heck's going on? They were looking for someone with more experience.
Yeah.
So I didn't really perceive myself as being interviewed. I just said, we're getting acquainted, whatever the heck it is, And so we sit in Buckner's office and talked and laughed and cut up. They're asking me all kind of questions about my history in the Youth for Christ campus life movement, which I was a youth minister in Youth for Christ campus life for 3 years. And we get to the end of that conversation, and Buckner says to Dan, take care of him. And so we walk out, and Dan says, is your wife here? And I said, yeah, she's at the house with my sister. He says, I'd like to take the two of you to dinner tonight.
Yeah.
And so, and
not
Dan,
a request, really, was it? Yeah.
Dan loved to wine and dine people.
Yeah.
He was a great entertainer, and we went to one of the hotel restaurants downtown. And at the end of dinner, we're sitting in his car, and he turned to Patricia and said, how would you feel if we invited you to move to San Antonio? Not me, her, And so suddenly, that was the first I really realized I was being interviewed.
Wow.
I did not know I was being interviewed for certain.
And that was in what year?
That would have been in the summer of 79.
79. And that started, so then you were here 30 plus years?
We arrived here on August the 15th, 1979. Not that I remember the date or anything like that. I met J.W. Fortner that first day. I walked in. Dan walked me across the hall to J.W., the business administrator, and shut the door. And Fortner pushed an envelope to me, and he said, just so happens that the 15th of August is payday. And I went, well, in my experience, you work 2 weeks and then you get paid.
Yeah.
You don't get paid and then work. And he said, well, we sort of figured you needed some money.
Little scratch to get going, man.
And I said, yeah, we do.
Generous place, my goodness. And so you ended up serving how long in total here at Trinity?
26 years.
26 years. So you were singles or young adults for a while?
Well, they said they simply called it young adults.
Young adults, yeah.
And that meant both single and married.
Yeah.
And what was exploding, it's not that young marrieds was not a vibrant, growing thing, but what was exploding was single adults.
Okay.
And my background in Youth for Christ campus life ministry was working with teenagers.
Yeah.
But it was all about figuring out where unchurched people are.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you walk on a high school campus and make inroads with kids that could care less about church, could care less about spiritual things? How do you do that?
Yeah.
And as I got to analyzing what was happening in our culture, on a scale never before in this country's history, people were getting divorced. And that we had a culture that was just exploding with formerly married people. And so we started doing a thing called Picking Up the Pieces. It was simply a weekend seminar for people who were living through or had experienced divorce. The single adult ministry just literally exploded.
Wow. Interesting.
And that would have been the picking up the pieces. That was the puzzle piece that giving a caring response to a hurting population was the key.
Yeah.
So we saw a phenomenon take place that I don't think anyone fully anticipated.
Yeah.
And the Rubel Community Center came online about that time. It was purchased and renovated and basically given to the single adults to fill it up. And in the course, I was the minister with young adults / single adults from 79, the summer of 79, until 87.
Okay.
And in that span of time, the single adult ministry went from 2 classes, 2 small Sunday school classes, to over 300 people.
Wow.
We had, I'm talking about 300 people on a typical Sunday. The Rubel Center was like a small church unto itself. In terms of Bible study.
Not even a small church. It's a pretty good church. In
terms of Bible study, we had an enrollment in single adults that exceeded 1,000, and on a given Sunday we would have 300. We had 7 or 8 Sunday school departments, roughly age graded. It was real difficult to specifically age grade single adults, but roughly from post college through senior adult. And it was a phenomenon. It was it was just like we caught a tidal wave and rode it.
Well,
it was incredible.
I think when you look in history and just experience, most growth that happens, you add some strategy to it. Sometimes there's good, but a lot of times you're just in a moment and blessed by the Spirit. You know, any number of things come together, and you just embrace it and enjoy it. And it's a heck of a lot of work too, isn't it, when it comes?
It was. And that would be the, it was consuming. It was very consuming. I've described the really booming years. It was like being a surfer. You'd catch the wave, you'd ride it in, hit the shore, you pick up your board and you paddle back out and do it again. It's like we never took a break to really absorb what was happening around us. It was so relentless. The waves just kept coming.
And you don't want to miss one.
You don't want to miss one. That was kind of what it was like.
So then that was till about 87, and then you transitioned into what sort of role?
Buckner, we didn't have a whole lot of one-on-one conversations, but we had some critical ones. And he asked me, he says, what would you like? What do you want your future to be? And I said, well, I think I want my future to be right here. And he said, so what next? And I said, well, maybe the married adults, all of the married adults. And so I took responsibility for all of the married adults, and he said, find your replacement with single adults. So put together a little search committee and made up of single adults, and we found Ron Hill. And I took married adults. Ron took single adults. Being a single adult himself, he had far more compatibility with that. And being a married adult myself, I had far more compatibility with married adults. And so I was the married adult minister. And again, the old-fashioned Sunday school strategies of many generations still worked. If you have a vacant space, and if you can enlist leaders, and if you can identify a list of prospective people, then push the button. and we just kept expanding the organization. We expanded classes. We continued to enlist and train teachers and leaders. There was a stream of people that went through that process that are today major leaders.
No, that's right. Still
Trinity
there.
Baptist Church today. That kind of came through that process. And when you've got when you've got a pastor like Buckner who was drawing a lot of people, we had an endless stream of prospective folks.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a phenomenon.
Yeah. And that's part of what I wanted to visit with you about. We on staff now talk about, heck, most of our staff wasn't alive during Trinity's heyday. Yeah, I mean, whenever you consider the heyday, that's not exactly true. But
it had multiple heydays.
There was and it was
really did.
Yeah, it was a long
multiple
thing.
heydays.
But Jacob and I, our worship minister, particularly talk about how much we'd love to go back, pick your time when it was just clicking and just going well, and just to go back for a Sunday and be there and absorb it, and just we could understand people's love for it and what it was like, but to experience it for ourselves. Can you give us that feel of what it was like when Trinity was kind of at its zenith, whenever you feel that was? And you said maybe there were several of just what the Spirit was doing and what it was like to work and serve through that.
Well, obviously we inherited, and when I say we, Buckner inherited a church that was already renowned in the country.
Yeah.
Time magazine article about most innovative church in America.
Yeah.
Skating rink, bowling alley, gymnasium,
amphitheater,
counseling ministry. It was already this incredibly innovative place that innovatively figured out how to reach people.
Yeah.
Well, Buckner inherited that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
He himself, he was an evangelist.
Yeah.
He had never been a pastor. He pastored only one church in his life, Trinity Baptist.
Huh.
He had been an evangelist.
Yeah.
He never lost his evangelistic zeal.
Yeah.
And it's team building.
Yeah.
I've always, my personal history is I've been very, very blessed to always be a part of a team. And we had team ministry. Yes, we had this charismatic leader. But we had a team. And that's where I plugged in. I plugged into team and team building. But the heyday, there was that heyday with McBurney that Buckner inherited, and then Buckner created his own evangelistic zeal heyday, and just pure numerics. The pinnacle was in the early 90s.
Was it? Okay.
Yes, it was. It was in the early 90s. It was somewhere in the early 90s, in retrospect. We lost the edge. Just frankly. But in those early 90s, a typical Sunday, we had a total of roughly 2,000 in attendance in Sunday school and Christian education. I shouldn't even say Sunday school. Christian education. From preschool through oldest adults, we would have roughly 2,000 in attendance. But we would have 3,000 in worship. And worship was in two services. The early service was always modest. The 11 o'clock service was always packed. And
that's amazing. You can fit that many in. Really, that's amazing.
Well, but again, 3,000 between the two services.
Between the two,
and that may be a little high, but nonetheless, I know emphatically that Sunday school ran in the 1900s to 2000. On good Sundays. I know that for a fact. Worship was always more nebulous.
It is harder to count.
It's harder to deal with, but it was in the vicinity of 3,000. And the parking lots were cram-packed. The controversy of the day was parking on the curbs. And the neighbors were really unhappy with us. And, what do you do about that? Just, you do the best you can with that.
Friends, thank you for tuning in. Continue to tune in each week as we offer new episodes telling different stories of the history and God's movement at Trinity Baptist Church. Please like, please subscribe, please share with your friends. Have a great day.